to take a minute and summarize what we have accomplished since we convened at 1 o'clock. I think that'll probably set a good stage in terms of, we need a roll call?
No, I wanted to remind everybody that when we have a break, turn off your mics. Because when the mics are on, you're all live.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Stan, would you?
Okay. I think what we, by consensus, agreed to with regard to the outreach at this point was that we would anticipate having 50-plus meetings, the plus being designed to take care of the lesser populated, more remote areas of California. We would send teams, not identified teams specifically, but teams of at least 3, or not more than 3 rather, to each of these locations. And each of the teams would be represented, 1 Republican, 1 declined to state, and 1 Democrat. And then we would develop means to more regional meetings to incorporate public comment as we develop the maps. That's my understanding of what we had agreed to do. I invite people to tell me anything I left out or overstated.
We also discussed the rotational.
Oh, I'm sorry.
chair.
I was just focusing on the other. Yes, we also focus on the rotation of the chair and vice chair that would alternate between. We'd never have 2 of the same party, and the vice chair would become the next meeting's chair, or the next period of meetings chair, and we would change chairs at every break, multi-day break in our series of meetings.
Peter, it just occurred to me on this issue of identifying the 50 places. I don't want to get the details yet, but there are models out there where we could actually find the location with which you could reach the population fastest with 50 spaces, but you could also put a constraint on it that says, and no one has to travel more than X number of miles, and then that way we'd identify the places that we need to have a special location in.
How can we get the February schedule going so that we don't lose schedule? Is somebody interested in either volunteer to do that or come up with a quick way to get the show on the road, so to speak, before we carefully plan out the entire 50 meetings? In other words, February is coming up very quickly, and if we're going to agendize it, we're going to do all these things, we probably need to just proceed and do it.
You're asking, excuse me, to identify
the outreach meetings
the
for
possible locations?
Right.
Okay.
So Vince,
Where's Vince?
you said there's software to do that. I mean, how quickly can it be done? Can we ask staff to do that?
I would suggest we turn that over to staff and find out where the locations are.
Well, I would, but to sort of stay on a linear schedule, we probably need to get about 15 meetings, say, going in the month of February. So.
Yeah, and I would agree. For example, I would think one of the places we're going to end up is the San Fernando Valley. And if we are, I would be more than happy to make a contact with the university there and see if they would be, do something similar to what you did at Claremont.
All right, so maybe with 14 of us, and maybe each of us should try to plan a site in February. Would that be appropriate? So that at least we can get whatever works out, we can at least get the process going. And work with staff to schedule it and approach it from that perspective.
How long will it take to get the data we asked for as far as 50 most encompassing locations?
I can't tell you that right now. I don't even know where that information is located. I know that Commissioner Barabbas had indicated that we could run some type of algorithm and do that, but first I have to identify that. Perhaps I could try to get that information this evening. I know if I can and report tomorrow, but it's just an unknown to me now.
Is that, I'm sorry, is that the information that Commissioner Blanco was referring to from Irvine Foundation? Is that similar? Do they already have that information, or am I confusing?
No,
this?
that's different. I think the thing that we would borrow from that was sort of the concept of proximity. You know, once we decide on the region, then I think within that, we'd want to locate the place in the most proximate location, but it's different.
I guess what I was thinking of is let's pick the low-hanging fruits first, identify the most populous area in your neck of the wood, and let's go ahead and get these meetings going, and we can basically cover the areas as we have more data to proceed. Because if we wait until we're organized before we get going, we're going to lose a month or more.
What would help me to do that, I mean, I can make several phone calls and probably set a couple of them up in the area, but it would help me if I could get a paragraph or a page from staff of what we need. So when I call these people, I can tell them much more precisely what we have in mind.
I think that's a fair comment, and something I was kind of wondering myself when we get to planning the actual outreach meetings, as far as in the interest of being fiscally responsible and, like you said, being able to be as low-tech as possible to avoid problems off-site, is, again, are we going to, is our approach going to be to just audio, live stream, video, and post the video later? What is going to be the approach with those? I think that's a good question.
I just have a question. As I'm listening to you, I understood you to say that we were looking for population by an advisor of 50. So where are the 50 population areas? Understanding that certain areas are going to dominate that map, and so
I'm only proposing that as a starting point for the month of February, because we won't have our act totally together to carefully pinpoint the 50 or approximately 50 most likely areas that we should hit. So in order not to lose any schedule, if we simply hit the highest population first, I don't think we can go too far wrong using that as a starting point. Maybe there's no agreement to that approach, but it's just
Chairman,
thinking out loud.
Let me make a suggestion. Since we're going to be in Southern California for our two sets of meetings in February, that we ought to see if we can't schedule meetings in Southern California. We're already going to be there.
Great.
I mean, so at least perhaps for the Saturday following our meetings or something. Anyway, just since we're already there, it might be easier. That's a possibility.
Right. Excuse me, Cynthia. Let me sort of answer Commissioner Forbes' suggestion. We can certainly take part of our time while we're in Claremont to practice our outreach activity, or use that as an experimental site to do what we think we want to do. That certainly would be welcome.
But would we also be open to, for example, on Saturday, sending off our little teams to other Southern California areas? Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah, I feel like we haven't, and, you know, this is what we'll either discuss as a full commission or as an outreach committee, but we haven't talked about guidelines for how we want to receive public input. I mean, I seem to recall we discussed this last time and agreed that we were not going to allow the schedule to push us to do kind of a haphazard job in Claremont.
Exactly.
I'm making the assumption that by the end of next week, we would be there. I think that's maybe an invalid assumption, but that's basically where I'm heading at this point in time.
So am I hearing correctly that what we're looking at right now is that staff will try and do, as Commissioner Baraba had mentioned, maybe do some of those crunching of numbers to give us an initial 50, but in the meantime, we as individual commissioners should start looking at places in Southern California, and I say looking, I mean are proposing sites, or
The correction is looking at the region that you're most familiar with, not necessarily in Southern California, to hold such a outreach meeting.
So when we say we're looking, I'm sorry, when you mention we should be looking at our region that we're familiar with for future outreach meetings, you're looking just in a general sense, because we're not asking individual places to hold dates for us. We don't have, I'd be hesitant to say, please hold this date if we don't have any idea. I guess part of it too, I was thinking during the break, I was talking with Commissioner Dye a little bit about the nature of this number of meetings in a limited amount of time. There seems to be, it would be beneficial to have a regional approach to these, so we don't have a meeting happening in Northern California, one in Central California, within a week, where you have commissioners physically maybe going to these different locations. If you could get a regional approach where we could get two birds with one stone.
If we're going to have 50 meetings, let's say over the next 3 months, and in the next 3 months, we're not going to be able to cover most of the region, even a significant part of the region, just by being there in our group meetings, okay? So it's going to have to be throughout the whole state, and
I recognize it has to be throughout the whole state. I'm just concerned that if we're all kind of at cross purposes, we're all out there trying to set up meetings with the best intentions, that we may be unnecessarily setting up things where later we have to change those schedules. I guess I'm trying to understand if we should be we as individual commissioners should be doing that now, or should we wait just a little bit till we get a little more guidance about where we're thinking those regional meetings are. At that point, we could go out and start establishing some of the contacts, but I just...
Okay, my thought is we pretty much know what our total commission meeting dates are. We set aside Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, a couple weeks in a month. I think we have a reasonable idea when we're going to hold the commission meeting, the subcommittee meetings. We're going to try to do that on a Wednesday of each of those meeting dates. So for all the other dates, it's open at this point in time. Now, it's true that when we agendize the meeting, it's for the entire month, and we may certainly continue to meet over the weekend, stretch the meeting as long as it's necessary to get the work done. But I don't know whether we can get more precise in terms of pinning down the dates, even in the month of February. So all the other dates at this point in time is somewhat open, and coordinate those dates with staff and try to schedule as many of these meetings as possible
So
is really what I was thinking of, and nothing beyond that.
So Commissioner Yao, is this what you have in mind? I mean, we don't have anything scheduled, for example, I don't think we do, on Saturday, the 19th of February. So I could go ahead and call up the city of Sacramento and say, we'd like to have a meeting that the city would help facilitate. Do you have a place we can do this? And that's why I said I would need the technical things, so I could say what I'm asking for. Could we have one of our outreach meetings on this date at a location that would work for you?
See, this is what I was concerned about. If Commissioner Forbes is calling up Sacramento and saying, how about the 19th, and Commissioner Ontai is calling up San Diego saying, how about the 19th, and I'm calling up Fresno and saying, how about the 19th, I guess I'm just saying I don't want us to commit too much. I think it would be great once we get an idea, but I'd hate to have 4 or 5 meetings scheduled overlapping without having some coordination.
Well,
I think we can prevent that. I'm just concerned. It's not that big of an issue. Staff can help us with that. I'm just concerned that
Well, let's
we don't
talk
do
about
that.
it. Is overlapping meeting okay? Because not all of us are going to be at the same, most of us are not going to be at the same location, so,
But if you have 4 of us all doing it at at different places, you're going to limit where you can go. I mean, based on if we weren't trying to have at least 3 people at each subcommittee meeting, if we schedule those, there's only a certain amount of Democrats, Republicans, and others that can physically go to these meetings.
all right, if there's no interest in trying to get things going fast, then let's go ahead and take time out to plan it out well and
Well,
proceed it
I
that
am
way then.
interested in seeing it start. So there has to be a way we can do this. I don't know if it's just giving ourselves a very short time frame, like until we come back next week, at least on Monday or Tuesday, make a couple calls and see if there's interest in an area that you can identify. Are they even willing to talk to you? At least we could come back next week with some sense of what the mood is out there in these venues that we want to approach. It's not going to, the time is just going to keep, the clock is going to keep ticking. So please, could we find some way to get started?
So I had suggested before that we are going to have to deal with the Voting Rights Act areas first, counties first. So it might behoove us to get the input from those areas first, just as a suggestion. I mean, we know we're going to have to deal with that independent of whatever outreach plan we come up with. We have to deal with those counties.
Do we know?
I'm just trying to think about the best place to start, because we mentioned populous areas, but then we had mentioned the Section 5, just for counties, and whether we should go back to that idea, because that's where we're going to need pre-clearance, and so the sooner we start on the Section 5 counties, the better. That I've just been trying to think about.
Commissioner Blanco, and those three counties, I believe, right?
4.
4 of them. What are they?
Merced, King,
Monterey.
Monterey, and Yuba.
Cuba. That's all in Commissioner Aguilar's area, right?
Not Monterey, not Monterey. And, well, Yuba would be, yeah, I mean, Central
I see.
Valley, but Yuba, yeah.
Okay, then what if 4 of us take responsibility for each contacting wherever in those counties? At least we'll start somewhere.
And what, like you were trying to get straight, what we're asking for is, do you have facilities that can accommodate, and what's the number, ballpark? 100? An audience of 100? Maybe.
We give them a maximum number, maybe 100.
I would imagine 100 would be the
100
max.
Max, and that's located in a central part of the county. ADA accessible, enough equipment so that there can be mics, and if we're only doing audio, that we can set up audio equipment, and that's kind of it, right?
But it would help me if it was in writing, so I could fax it to whomever was
Oh,
gonna be
yeah, I
responsible.
agree. I'm just trying to nail it down
Right.
here for us, that those are really like,
Right.
how many people it will hold, ADA accessible, microphone setup, audio visual, audio, capacity, and for, and I was going to say, and the other thing we haven't discussed is translation, and you bet in those 4 counties, you're going to want it. So we have to, now, that might be that something we have to, but we might have to find the translator, but we have to make sure that they have the ability to have enough mics so that it's not just us, but the audience and a translator.
Let me ask a naive question. So are we going to also assume that we're not going to pay for a thing?
I don't think you can make that assumption.
No, we may have to rent a facility. I mean, in some place it might be, we might be lucky and there's a community foundation, or there might be a community center, but in some places we might have, I think we might have to agree that we're willing to pay up to X.
So our
Amount.
contact would have to follow up with, we need some sense of a budget, what that would cost.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if we have a set budget or we sort of have a case-by-case budget.
Yeah, and
Mr.
would that
Baraba?
include?
Yeah,
would
Peter,
that
I'd
include-
be happy to volunteer to see if I could do it for Monterey County. And I think one of the things I would do is, once I made the contacts, I would then bring our executive director in to finalize the arrangements.
Yeah, we would need to make that clear from the very beginning, what the cost would be for the commission. And does it include mundane stuff like liability insurance and things of that nature?
I'd be happy to do the same for Merced County.
So I think these are a lot of things that staff can look into. We've talked before about utilizing the UC system, CSU, and community colleges, community centers. I just think that if we're going to, this should not be something individual commissioners have to do. We just need to set the guidelines and let staff do their job. So we can just set these guidelines and be clear. Do we want to have not only translation, but do we want to deal with sign language? These are just philosophically, again, what do we want to have happen at these meetings?
I totally agree, so if staff could give us a checklist or something we can use, that would be very helpful.
I do think that as we're in this transition time, Daniel's had all of how many hours to adjust, and there are many things on his plate right now, and so I personally would like him to prioritize on getting support staff, and so I don't think that in 2 months this will be my role, calling Merced to arrange a meeting, but I'm definitely willing to pitch in and just get the ball rolling.
And I think it's important to recognize that commissioners may have personal relationships in places. That's how Peter arranged Claremont. So I don't think we should totally turn our backs on making use of what commissioners can do.
And I'll volunteer to kind of blaze the trail in Ventura County. It's about 1 million people in the county itself, pretty compact. My contacts are probably, we could probably get Cal State Channel Islands and or the Ventura County Superintendent of Schools office that have all of this in place. Just a question of what cost might be involved. And it would also be good to have some kind of a letter from the commission that says that this is the effort, this is the concept, and these are the requirements that we're looking for. We can start to rough it out at this point, and I think the suggestion, by Peter is an excellent one, and buttressed by the comments by Jeannie, that we need to get the ball rolling because we're kind of setting it up as we go. I think if we do it a couple of times in 2, 3, 4 locations, then we'll get it set. And then we can look at longer term scheduling, because we'll have the package already. So Ventura, I could work on for, if not February the 19th, very soon thereafter.
The only, as we're listing the criteria, I really urge us to think about accessibility, not just in terms of ADA, but to communities, that it may be easier to hold it at a college, but it may not be a place that people go to. And I know when I did this, I didn't do it personally, but I sort of supervised some of this at Maldiv 10 years ago. A lot of the meetings, and that's obviously because it was a community organization, but were held sort of in places, what we were really trying to find out was what were the communities of interest that people, so you really want those people to attend the meeting. So I think we have to be careful not to let expediency override the fact that we want people attending the meeting that we really need to hear from, that we might not hear from otherwise every 10 years to do something like this.
Yeah, let me follow up on that. I think each of us come from different parts of California that we're sensitive to where these communities are, and I think it probably behooves each of us to look at where these communities are and where informal gatherings should take place rather than more formal settings.
I just wanted to comment that, well, I think we should certainly take advantage of the networks that we all have. That's the reason we were selected to be a diverse commission. I just want to be a little cautious about kind of to Commissioner Blanco's point of getting caught up with expediency and ending up scheduling a lot of things because it's convenient, because we have contacts there, and then nobody shows up to the meetings. Because, you know, setting up the schedule is great and getting started in the meetings are great, but if it's not accompanied with a good, you know, outreach campaign to let people know that the meeting's happening and it's going to be at this place, we really run the risk of getting ahead of ourselves and getting these venues and all the mics set up and nobody knows about it.
Daniel?
I'm wondering if we might not be able to get both of the things we want, to get started quickly, but at the same time, not exclude some of the areas where people aren't as informed. And so what I'm thinking is, there are certain areas where you could plan your meetings initially that are what you said, Mr. Chairman, the low-hanging fruit, places where people are already informed. So you could go to places where you have institutes like the Center for Government and start having your meetings there while you hone your package and hone your message, and we get the outreach out to the areas where we're less likely to get informed people unless we do the outreach. So it might be an approach that you hit the places you know and then go for the ones that you don't.
I'm assuming this discussion will come up, or maybe we're moving towards it, but kind of to tag team on the previous discussion, I think it's also important, but we don't put the cart before the horse in the sense that we schedule a lot of meetings, we don't have content to give, to present. I think the educational aspect of these outreach meetings that Commissioner Aguirre had mentioned early on is really going to be an important part, as well as, of course, what is the educational aspect, but also our outreach to them, their outreach back to us. But I'd like to hope that we could have something that's pretty consistent, at least a starting point that we could take. If we're starting meetings in February, it'd be nice to have a similar package that we could bring to each place so that we're on the same page and the public feels like each location is given the same information and given an opportunity to give it back in the same manner too.
I think, in thinking about that as well, and kind of listening to a lot of the roads that are out here, I think it would help me to define, again, we talked about this a little bit earlier, exactly what our vision is of this outreach meeting. I've heard the outreach awareness, wave the flag, someone said, but that is a goal, to educate, I've heard mentioned as a goal, to take testimony as a goal. Is there any other purposes that we want to make sure we're encompassing at these outreach or off-site visits?
The only point I would make is on these first four that we talked about, they're going to be very focused towards the Voting Rights Act. And so that agenda may be set up quite different than the general outreach. And so those first four might be a little bit different than what you might expect elsewhere.
Let me just sort of get your input. Do you think we'll have this, whatever we want to call it, package, this outreach package put together, let's say within a couple of weeks? If you don't think we would get that done, then clearly we're putting the cart before the horse. I am making the assumption that we're going to be there within a couple of weeks, okay? And we're basically trying to line up the meeting along with the all the decisions that we will make, and everything will be lined up and ready to go. But if that assumption or if that wishful thinking isn't realistic, maybe I am rushing it excessively.
I know that I mean, I agree with you. I talked to our executive director during lunch just to get a time frame for the communications director, because I think, again, we have to have maximum impact, when we take the time to go and do these visits. I think having a communications director in place is paramount, at least two of our top priorities with these meetings. And so although identifying potential locations seems to make sense, it just seems to me that having a targeted vision, and if we're going to go ahead and wait for an algorithmic breakdown of how to, target the state and have as broad a net as possible, then it seems like that data and those staff positions would have to be in place and set up in order to, before we start making decisions on where to go and what to go. Otherwise, we might be wasting resources.
Yeah, I think it's aggressive. I mean, it takes time for people to give notice at jobs. 2 weeks is very typical. We were very lucky with the case of our executive director. I think you have to let the staff have some startup time and onboard people and get people in place. So I think 2 weeks is aggressive. Do I think we can get started in February? Yes. It's probably going to be the last week, is my guess, before we get everything together.
And for myself in San Diego County, I know we want to try to push this forward as fast as we can, but my method would be to contact various community groups to get a collaboration as to where the best venue would be, rather than myself independently picking a site.
I think that's a good idea.
So what are we exactly charged with doing from today's meeting? Are we just waiting till we have a communications director? Is there a way to make use of a two-person subcommittee to, kind of start pulling together some ideas that could come back to the commission on a packet and so on, that whole idea?
What I was
And
hoping.
then also maybe identify possible venues in general, and bring that back to the, because then you don't have to agendize it, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think Peter and I talked about this before. We need to get to the point where we actually do have agendas for the subcommittees and, and tasks that we want them to work on with, deliverables, and expected dates when those things will happen. So I think we've started discussing a lot of things. We started discussing what the requirements are. For example, what is our philosophy about dealing with, translators, sign language, again, back to, I don't think we've fully fleshed out what our vision is for what one of these sessions would look like. What is the framework for how we take input? Do we have, as Dan was saying, a consultant at every meeting? Do we need other staff at every meeting? I mean.
Okay, well, that's kind of what I'm asking. Could we charge two people so that we don't violate anything? Have two people make up that list that you're reciting now, something that we can actually sit down and talk about and come to some decisions. Otherwise, it's a pretty drawn-out process for all of us to sit here and talk about it, and we're not moving forward. And I apologize. I even said this in my interview, that patience is not one of my virtues. But, I feel a little frustrated that I think there has to be a way we can move forward. It's just going to take some flexibility.
Are we saying that the first hearing would be at the end of February? Is that what this February date is that we're kicking around?
Well, first of all, you have to agendize the meeting 14 days in advance, all right? So if we don't agendize anything until the end of this month, the first meeting can't happen until middle of February.
No, I understand that. I'm just trying to get clarification. When we say the meeting in February, we're talking about our first public meeting.
The first public meeting of this commission is scheduled for the 9th of February.
I'm talking about the community meetings, the outreach meetings. Have we been talking about trying to do that in February?
Again, my thinking is, in term of the quote-unquote outreach meetings, we really only have February, March, perhaps April to get all that done. So if we do not do anything in February, then basically we only have March and April to complete the, whatever number of meetings, 50 meetings.
Correct.
And we can certainly do that. But then we also have the option of getting going, learn from our mistakes, if any, and then tailor the process meeting by meeting until we get it right. There's absolutely nothing that keeps us from going back to the site of the first meeting if we feel that the first meeting didn't achieve everything that we decided that we want to obtain from subsequent lessons. So the trade-off is whether we want to take advantage of the schedule in the month of February, or whether we want to take time out and plan everything out in great detail, have all the answers, be consistent, and all the data points that we want to collect clearly understood before we try to get some of these feedbacks.
Do we have
I saw, yeah.
continuing, do we have an ability either today or tomorrow to actually have a pretty in-depth discussion about what happens at those meetings and what we need to have ahead of time?
That's what I'm hoping that we can
Okay.
accomplish. I really want to not only putting the framework of the outreach subcommittee or outreach activity in place, but also define the activity of the outreach effort.
Right, because I think everybody's right, we're under the gun, but there's some, besides getting testimony, it seems to me that there's some things we need to be prepared with before we go into some of these locations. Like, we should have data about population, income levels, number of schools, where the schools are located, all those things. I mean, you don't want, it seems to me we want to know a lot, in a sense, about that community, so that the testimony that we receive from the people in attendance isn't about giving us facts that we could find on the internet, but is hearing their vision as to how they see their community has changed, what things do they think are essential to keep together for purposes of both communities of interest and compactness. So I think in order to receive that testimony, even understand what they're talking about, whoever goes to that meeting has to have information ahead of time about that community. So that was my question about the timing, is that there's work that has to be done, and I don't know who does it, that's very fact gathering and that we have under our belt before we even get there.
Okay, let me have Mr. Claypool speak. He's been...
The only thing I would add to this is understanding everyone's frustration about not knowing which way to move. This is, I think, very much what your consultant in this field is going to offer you, that most of the things that you are asking right now, that consultant, whoever that group is, these are going to be things that they know. That they're going to say, well, of course you do this first and you do that. I would say that if there was one thing that was as important as your communications director right now, it's getting in line to find out who's going to provide those types of services to you, getting that request for proposal out, getting their information back. That's something that you can look at, you can compare their services, you can decide what you want, and then we can get moving on the recommendations they're going to make, because they're going to have a coherent plan.
So is that something that we need to put on an agenda or not necessarily, John, but have we put anything out yet in terms of trying to get some of these consultants? Because again, if we're looking at, another week of us meeting in January and then February, we need to get the request out there for people to submit their interest, interview or look at people, hire them, and then get them on board. We're talking.
I think part of the discussion tomorrow is to authorize the executive director to make those decisions. And again, we're a little bit ahead of that discussion at this point in time, but we will have a discussion and we will have a proposal, and I think my vision is to have the organization totally in place before we break in January. In other words, today, tomorrow, plus the next 3 days, we should be fully addressed the staffing organizational issues and make significant progress in that area. As far as the data and the question that we need to ask in the outreach, I think as soon as the staffing or the consulting contracts are in place, I think those data will be readily available. Again, because we haven't discussed it, it's strictly an assumption on my part at this point in time. But I'm on our current agenda is really to go through all those steps. I'm not sure I'm giving you a level of confidence.
Oh, no, I'm just thinking. No. I just didn't know if it had been put out yet, if we were even moving.
All right. Let's, does anybody need a break at this point? No? Okay. We can continue to discuss the outreach, or I can jump on to the next item, which is the scheduling of our next meeting, the February meeting in City of Claremont, if you want me to go into that.
I would suggest maybe we come back to the outreach tomorrow morning, and that also would give the public a chance. I know there's many interested parties who might have
All right.
thoughts they'd like to introduce.
Good idea. Good idea.
Can I make one clarification for the record, is that we not call the Section 5 counties the Voting Rights Act counties, because all our counties are Voting Rights Act counties, and those are Section 5 counties. But everything we deal with is a Voting Rights Act county.
So the official name is Voting Rights Act and not the other one.
No, the official name is Section.
All right. Yes.
Oh, okay. No, I just wanted to be sure. Section 5 works fine. Those are the pre-clearance counties. Those are the Section 5 counties. Everybody is a Voting Rights Act county, but the state doesn't have to pre-clear, and none of the other counties have to pre-clear. And when we get to discussing pre-clearance, let me know, because as I had mentioned before, the Attorney General is willing to do the pre-clearance. They did the pre-clearance for the maps, and they did the pre-clearance the last time it was done. That's, again, absolutely your decision. And there are people you could hire who are experts in pre-clearance, but I just mentioned the Attorney General because my guess is they'll be a little cheaper.
Can you give us an idea at what point in our effort do we have to start worrying about it?
Really, you
pre-clearance?
need to worry about it right from the get-go.
Right from the beginning? Okay.
I think it would be good to have the persons involved in pre-clearance sort of on board as early as possible. It can be nothing more than a boring process, or it is that, always, unless it's contentious. But the earlier the person is on board, the better, and they can advise you. Now, I don't say this out of a great personal experience with pre-clearance, but when I talk to everybody involved in pre-clearance, and since I knew it was done before, I contacted the AG's office, and they're willing to do it, and they sort of assume they're going to do it, so if we want to go a different direction, we should let them know.
Thank you.
So, sorry, that's not a hired position, is it? Or compensated position?
You know, if we use the AG, we have to, I'm not sure how we have to pay them, but we don't have to hire anybody, and we don't have to let a contract with everybody. Essentially, the AG is the state's lawyer unless you have statutory authority to hire your own lawyer, which we do for House counsel. If we get involved in litigation and we wanted to, for example, hire outside counsel, we'd have to get the AG's permission. But they bill on a hourly basis, and I can assure you that there's nobody in private practice who bills at that basis. We always laugh because it looked to us like paralegals from outside firms were billing at a higher rate than we were billing as lawyers, so it gives you some idea.
You know, I think we should use them for the, I mean, Section 5 preclearance is paperwork, basically, in some ways. What we have to do in terms of treating the counties differently because they're in Section 5 is not what we need somebody to hire to do specifically. Whoever we hire to help us with all of our
Right.
work can also cover the area of the counties, the Section 5 counties. What the Secretary of State would do is do the preclearance with the DOJ in D.C., which is what has to happen. Yeah, it has to be cleared, actually, it has to be cleared with the Voting Rights Division of the Department
Right.
of Justice, and it's paperwork that has to happen. But that's something that really, we could just have the Secretary of State do, but I think we're talking about that we need somebody on board quick that can, you know, deal with what we were talking about, how to structure these meetings, how to, you know.
Yeah, if you like, when, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but we have to do a revised agenda fairly soon, so maybe before we leave today, or certainly before we leave tomorrow, let me just go do a little laundry list and be sure I have, for sure, I know what you think we want to do in the next set of meetings, excuse me, and maybe one of the things we could do sometime fairly soon is have the AG come and talk to us about preclearance, and then you could ask questions, and they can tell you what the difference is between just a standard issue preclearance that we do routinely here for all laws that affect, for example, the elections code or elections, and what they do when the redistricting happens every 10 years. So we could just put...
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, it happens. They have to do it all the time, even between redistricting. Like when you move a polling place in a Section 5 county, that has to be cleared by the DOJ because it's a change in the voting practice. So they're used to doing it more than every 10 years. They deal with it fairly regularly.
Right, and we do our own preclearance for... It usually is just very routine.
Yeah.
But this is not a routine endeavor.
Last Thursday, Friday, the commission tasked me to looking into City of Claremont as a potential location for the February meeting site. I have since talked to the CEO of the Claremont Colleges and lay out to him our requirements and express to him what we need. What I expressed to him is that on the 9th, 10th, and 11th, those are absolute days that we would meet. But there also is a chance that we would extend into Saturday and Sunday following the 11th. And then I further lay on him the second half of the February meeting. I don't have a calendar in front of me. 25th, 26th, 27th, I think those are the right dates. And again, going into the following weekends. And I asked him to have a facility that's wide enough for all of us to be sitting similar to the layout that we have. Microphones, live video feed that can connect to the internet, enough microphones for public participation for staffs, as well as an auxiliary meeting room where we can hold closed sessions. And I approach him saying that that we'd like for them to pick up all the costs that they incur in the process of accommodating us. And the feedback I have is, yes, they have 3 sites within Claremont Colleges that can accommodate what we're interested in. They will make those sites, one of those sites available to us at free of charge. They will have parking facility not only for us, but for audience that may come and join us. They would have facility to entertain the anticipated media during the first day or half a day of meeting that we would have in Southern California. Let's see, what else? They also offer to provide food and on, but I suggest to him that that's not what we're asking for, and that probably would not be necessary. They would have adequate security to deal with of having a high-profile group in town, in a small town. So across the board, they gave me a green light in terms of being able to host a meeting in City of Claremont. And knowing that there are concerns about some of the special interest group in town, also lay on him a set of ground rules saying that none of those can be discussed or highlighted or bring into our discussion at any point in time. So all those conditions were accepted. So the decision is really rests with us as to whether we want to hold a meeting off-site or not. I think the understanding from last week is that the default location is back here in Sacramento. If we do not want to go off-site, specifically into the city of Claremont, we basically can continue holding the meeting here in Sacramento. So it's at this point in time up to us to decide as to whether we want to go off-site to city of Claremont for the February meeting.
Can you remind me, the closest airport there would be in Ontario, right? And how close is that?
Ontario Airport is about 10 minutes away from city of Claremont, and I have made arrangement both with the hotel there, which is a DoubleTree hotel, that will have rooms for us at the $84 stay rate. Plus, they will provide us transportation back and forth from the airport at no cost.
Metrolink station there?
There is a Metrolink stop right in the city of Claremont. So from the Metrolink station, you can walk to the colleges. And the hotel will provide shuttle service from the Metrolink station to the hotel. And the hotel is within walking distance to the colleges, but the walk is very similar to the walk from Holiday Inn to this facility. It's longer than an average stroll.
So Peter, the dates again is February what and what and what?
Yeah,
9, 10, 11 with the possibility of 12 or 13.
We decided last week the meeting shall start on the 9th, which is a Wednesday, 9:30, and for sure we will go through Friday, the 11th, and as necessary, we'll work the 12th and the 13th. And I think we plan to agendize the meeting starting on the 9th and running all the way through the end of the month. So we have the option of continue the meeting even following the Sunday. In other words, going through from 13, 14, 15 and on. It's the part of the demand on them is our flexible schedule. And for sure, we're going to meet again on the 23rd 24th and 25th, which is a Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and again, with the option of going through the weekend.
And that's possibly at Claremont again, or we haven't got to that point yet?
We need to agendize the meeting on the 9th on the 25th of January in order to meet the Bagley-Keene or the Voters First Act 14 days requirement. And as long as we agendize the meeting for the 23rd, let's say 14 days in advance, we are at liberty to change it. And the college is fine with not hosting the meeting on the 23rd. I mean, there was no condition that they lay on us in terms of hosting the entire month of February.
But conversely, they may entertain that.
They have committed to entertain us for the entire duration in February.
Okay, great. Do you need a motion?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for doing that to you and Claremont Colleges. I know that's not an easy task to throw that in there, so thank you very much, Commissioner Yao, for doing that. I very much like the idea of doing that meeting on the 9th there in Claremont. I'm also interested, as you had mentioned earlier as well, too, is maybe looking into even another site for the later in the month, just to see if anyone else has the contacts or any ideas about moving it to another location, just because I think you were under such a tight deadline to try and find out about Claremont. If anyone else has contacts for the later in February, maybe we can see if it's an option before we have to agendize for later in that month. And I think it's only because it would be nice to continue to move our meetings around as much as we can to try and reach as much of the public, but knowing that Claremont has graciously offered to continue in Southern California if we'd like to.
Yeah, and I think there's no reason we can't amend our agenda, at the first meeting, as long as we allow 14 days. There were also some discussions about security and other items.
I asked Mr. Claypool to see if he can provide a general set of guidelines that the state may have onto both the campus and also the city, so they can, at the minimum, meet those guidelines. In the absence of that, they are very well qualified to handle it the way they see fit. They have had both Clintons in town. They have had hosted a number of dignitaries on campus as guest speakers and so on. So they're not excessively worrying about it, so to speak, but I want to basically make sure that we discuss that in light of the recent experience in Tucson. I do not want them to be accused of negligent or less than prudent if something unfortunately does happen. And so that was brought up as a discussion point. Again, I received commitment from both the colleges and from the city to meet those requirements, to provide a secure environment for us. So.
That's great. And I may have missed this, but did you ascertain that we had the necessary facilities for the video live streaming?
In fact, there will be one microphone for each individual commissioners, and there will be adequate microphone for staff and for public inputs, and the seating. I put down 150, I think was the requirement I lay on, but if we want it to be a larger facility or larger seating capacity, they can honor that as well. Easily meet up to 300, if my recollection is correct from my conversation with them.
I didn't mean mics, I meant video streaming?
They have committed to meeting any and all requirements that we have in terms of providing live streaming onto our internet site, and between now and then they have committed to make that happen.
I think that's fantastic, Peter. I think the one last thing that we might want to address as a commission is whether we want to have, like I said, translators or signers. at full commission meetings? Do we have any thoughts that may or may not be necessary in the city of Claremont that we might want to have some policy?
Well, this
on?
being a general meeting similar to the meeting that we have now, I don't know whether we should change our standard in terms of providing translators and so on and so forth. It's up to this group to decide, but I did not perceive that as anything other than a continuation of the meeting that we have now, except at an off-site location. This is not meant at this point in time to be an outreach type of meeting. In light of the subject that we just finished discussing, we may want to take advantage of it and couple outreach activity as part of this meeting, just to test the water, so to speak, or try out things that we want to experiment with. So we can certainly add that to it.
So could we charge Dan to look into what it would cost, or find out for us what a consultant would be that could provide hearing impaired services, language services at this event? Can you put that on your checklist?
Is from what the chairman just mentioned, though, I thought didn't we just talk about not agreeing to?
Just because we haven't done it in the past doesn't mean we shouldn't. That's what I wanted to discuss as a commission, whether we think that's important or not.
We have a way for when we notice meetings. Isn't there? I'm trying to remember exactly what's on our agendas. There's something that says if you do need accommodations, and maybe we could be specific about those accommodations, translators, those for hearing impaired, or whatever else we think. So that way we can give people. We don't want to assume and incur the cost if we don't need to. But maybe there's part of our publicity and outreach, as well as our agenda posting, could include those who need that to notice us beforehand.
And I would think that we need some flexibility for when we have a meeting in a Section 5 area, like translation may be required.
Yeah, required, yeah. I think yeah, you're right. Make that assumption.
I'd be happy to investigate in Oakland for the latter February meeting or a future meeting, March.
All right, I would welcome a decision from this commission, maybe by a vote, as to whether we would maybe I would propose saying we definitely will have the first part of the meeting in the city of Claremont with the option of continuing all the way through the end of the month, so that I can go back and continue the planning process for this to happen.
So moved.
Second.
Dan?
I just want some clarification. When we were talking about looking for those costs, are we talking about for Claremont? Or are we talking about for outreach? Or are we talking about for everything? I mean,
What I asked the CEO to do is to track all the costs he incurred in hosting this meeting for us, and he will share those information with us, and he basically have commit to me that he will pick up any of the costs that we would ask him to pick up. But my conversation with him was that it is not my goal to save money in this particular meeting, but rather setting up a sustainable process so that we can use it over and over again as we reach into the other communities. So if we don't want him to pick up, for example, let's say the video process, then we can let him know, or else we can make that decision after the fact, or we can do anything else that we want. But at this point in time, none of those are conditions of the colleges hosting this meeting for us.
I apologize. What I was referring to was for the hearing impaired and those.
That was not discussed with him. And
okay, but I was thinking what Commissioner Ontai had asked me to look for costs for that, and I wanted to know: am I looking for the costs specific to Claremont for someone to come in and do that, or am I looking for costs for everything that
Well, both, Dad. I think it would be both.
I think it would be both, and then we would hopefully be able to go back to Claremont and say, can you pick up those costs? In other words, if we decide, which is the next discussion, that we need translation services for both linguistic and also sign, and that we need, what was the other thing? Were those the two? Then I think we have to figure out in general what that costs for all our meetings, both fees and outreach, and then we would want to see if Claremont would pick up those costs.
Okay, I can ask about the sign language. In terms of translation, what
Yeah.
languages would
Well,
be thinking of?
So one of the things, it seems to me, if we want to move on to that conversation, and I'm not sure, I think we need some legal advice on this. I know that if you're a state agency that provides a service, and your population exceeds a certain percentage of a linguistic minority that's monolingual, you have to provide services, public services in that language. And you can do it, there's a lot of ways to do that. Pamphlets, this, that, whatever. So I'm not sure, number one, whether that applies to a commission meeting. I mean, we are a state, right now this is a state meeting. I don't know whether it's the Diamond Aleatory Act. I don't know whether that applies to something like this. It's really usually directed at services, health, 911, anybody who has public contact in a county that exceeds a certain percentage of a linguistic minority. I don't know if this entity and what the business we transact falls under the Diamond Aleatory. If it does, then we don't have an option of providing translation in whatever language falls under those. I can't remember, it's a percentage, and I don't remember right now what it is. And it may not be that that has, there are people who are experts on this. I don't know what it is, and like if we're in Claremont, I don't know if it's a county-wide population that you look at, or the city of Claremont, or because we're doing statewide work. But I think we need to get a handle on whether it's a requirement and not a choice. And I don't know at all the issues around disability and hearing impaired.
Okay, I have not given any of those areas any thought up to this point in time. Basically, I look at what we have done in the month of December,
Right.
in the month of January, and maybe all the previous meeting for the past 2 years, and I'm basically trying to follow the same set of guidelines. The only difference is instead of hosting those meetings in Sacramento, we're hosting it at an off-site location. I guess I would need some input.
Right, correct.
And
And
as I said, I'll be happy to ask if you want me to.
Right, I
to
think
ask.
that the question for us is, just because we didn't do it, as you pointed out, doesn't mean, maybe we should have been doing it, I don't know. So I think we need some kind of legal opinion about whether this meeting falls, no matter where it's held, or only if it's held in particular places, whether we're covered by the Diamond Aleatory Act on language.
And I would also add that we may have to consider the full scope of ADA requirements.
Yes, and right.
That is a civil rights issue.
That's right.
I opened it up. It's 5% who comprise 5% or more of the people served by any local office or facility of a state agency. And the state agencies are those that are defined in section 11,000. So I don't know if since we never existed before, I don't know. I have to go to that now and look it up.
And I think we should,
But that's
just
a
because
fairly
it's not
small percentage.
explicitly laid out in section, whatever the code, doesn't mean that the spirit of the code doesn't cover us.
Right. But 5% could be really tricky in some counties. That'd cover about it, you know, 10s, 20s, 30 different type of languages, depending on which county we're in, I would imagine.
Well, it's also what, do you interpret local office as wherever we hold a meeting? Is that our local office?
That's what I mean, that's what I'd like to
Yeah.
get a legal opinion on.
Fine at 11,000 on the government code?
Yeah. Yes.
Obviously specifically in the 8,000 area, but let me take a look at what 11,000 is, because I don't know it right off the top of my head, and get back to you on that issue.
I mean, I also think philosophically, you know, we should just, regardless of what the law says, you know, are we trying to increase transparency and access, and can we do it with volunteers? I mean, obviously, for some meetings, it may not be necessary. So, you know, we might just want to think about, from a policy standpoint, what we're looking for.
You know, we could add that, another thing, we could proactively provide it, or we could add that to the announcement we have about disabled facilities. If you need this, language assistance, something like that, that's a way to do it. That's obviously that's a policy choice up to you, but those are two options.
I guess staff needs to help me to properly ask that question. Once the discussion is translated, how do you distribute that translation? Does that mean a separate set of microphones, earphones, or what, separate rooms, separate? I guess I really don't, at this point in time, sitting here, I don't know how to ask that question. If we're just simply talking about translating it so that the tape is available, that's one thing, but translating it live, that's another set of issues. So I need some help.
I can say a little bit about local planning efforts that I've been involved with. So some of our community meetings, for example, in Richmond, California, we have as many as 4 languages, and we would be doing community workshops around transportation or land use policy. And so we would have translators, members of the audience would be able to have headsets, and so in each of the different languages you'd have a translator, or sometimes 2, depending on the length of the meeting. They might tag team to be able to give each person a break in between. So people in the audience are able to hear hear the simultaneous translation in the language of their choice, and then there is a translator available to be able to help them make comment if they choose to make comment. I would anticipate that the goal is for people to be able to not just hear the meeting afterwards, but to be able to, if they wanted to come give public comment. So that would be more the spirit of what we'd want to try and accomplish.
Let's see, that set of requirement applies whether we have a meeting in this room or whether we have a meeting off-site. Is that not correct?
That's what we need to find out, yes.
Okay. I don't know whether we have adequate time to address all those newly raised issues in terms of would the commission be interested in providing those services if by chance we decided that we must have them, as compared to ask and then if we get a less than satisfactory answer, then we basically have to bail and default a meeting back to Sacramento. I guess it's one of these things that we're going to have to incur the cost if we decided that we need it right here in this room.
Yeah, I don't see why the location would make a difference.
We should incur the cost. That's necessary.
I think what I hear Peter asking is, this is a showstopper? In other words, would we not, if we can't meet in Claremont, then we wouldn't be able to meet here either without these services being in place. Obviously, the meetings to date have taken place and been effective. There's been overwhelming public comments that we haven't been accessible to anybody, or at least none that we've received, or at least that I've received. So far we've been able to at least do our work and without critique, that we're leaving anyone behind at this point. I agree that in outreach and things like that, that's a separate issue, but at this point, are we going to say that we can't go offsite or we can't continue business without these things being in place, without a legal read, without all these kinds of things? I would argue that that's not the case, that we can continue to move forward, and when we get consultants on staff, these people are going to have protocol lists that have been used, for offsite meetings and testimony, offsite testimony meetings and things like that. They're going to address, I think, all of these issues, and they're going to be able to come to us and make a presentation recommendation, and we can then yay, nay, or adjust those recommendations as we see fit for each area that we visit. But it seems like, in my opinion only, we might be a little bit in the weeds as far as what we need to be discussing at this point with that.
Commissioner Yao, would it be possible for you to just do a little bit of research to determine if, we have the system in place regarding the 5 business days notice for any types of accommodation? I don't know to what extent the language that's in our agendas is dictated by law, or if we could finesse it to be able to, elaborate more about what types of access, language access, et cetera, we might be able to provide. And as long as we know that there is a firm or consultant or volunteers that could be on call if 5 days before the meeting we get word that that's a priority, or we get a ruling that it is. That way we have the flexibility and option. I would not want it to prevent us from going to Claremont. I think it's just another consideration.
Yeah, I have no qualm in terms of asking. That's the easy part. And I don't think the cost will really be an issue. Some of the uncertainty I have at this point in time is how many languages. Okay, and without knowing that, it's really put somebody on the spot in terms of making a commitment, and then later have to deal with it. How many sets of microphone are we talking about? How many different isolated area do we have to broadcast to? These are the type of time-sensitive question as compared to cost-sensitive. I don't think cost is going to be the driver. So,
we are in the weeds, but just to give you an idea, the way it usually works is that the translator, the people that need translation they have their headsets on, they have a little box, and then the person that's doing the translation is somewhere where they're speaking quietly, they don't interrupt, and so you don't have isolated areas anymore like you used to do in the old days of translation. People can sit anywhere and they have their little headset on where they're hearing everything. And when they want to speak, they raise their hand and they say it, and the translator says it out loud. So the cost is the translation, the person, and these headsets. That's the cost.
And this is an example of where, partnerships and outreach with different local community organizations may come into play. I know locally in Oakland, a lot of the ethnic serving organizations we work with, they have these setups and they use them regularly. And so given their vested interest in the public process, we may be able to tap into those relationships across the state.
all right.
I would offer a couple of comments. One is that I think that philosophically and in keeping in the spirit of the effort for outreach, that we should endeavor to provide translation services at both these meetings and outreach meetings. And the fact that we don't have an audience right now, I think is related to the fact that we're just getting going, and that as we publicize meetings going to various areas, and we publicize the outreach hearings that we're going to be doing, I think that the level of interest is going to kick up. And part of that kick up is going to be related to organized community groups that are very interested in this process. So I think that that I would like to see that we have translation services. The fact that we're moving fast on Claremont, and the fact that we may not be able to provide that there should not keep us from meeting. However, as soon as possible, we should get these things in place. So that. And the other comment is that it's good to call on volunteers to provide translation services, but really the quality of translation may not be up to the task. And so in that regard, I come from a city where we provide simultaneous translation in English and Spanish of all city council meetings that we have. And we had to go with somebody that was a certified translator who understood sometimes the very technical language and very technical concepts that we were discussing. So as we move forward in this, and we're talking about map drawing and district lines and incumbency and Voters' Rights Act and pre-clearance and all of these things, we need somebody that can not only understand that, but that has the language ability to translate it technically and in a legally acceptable manner too.
There are specific requirements in the law as well that a qualified bilingual person has been tested and certified by the State Personnel Board or some other testing authority approved by the State Personnel Board, unless you're a local agency, and then you can determine what's qualified.
It seems like we all agree that providing language services is something that we value, is something that we agree on. I think it's something that if the costs were incurred, we should assume that cost if it couldn't be provided by the hosting agency. It just seems like at this point it's more a matter of trying to find a way to make sure we're aware of those needs now, and then also having a mechanism in the future to make sure we're doing that. But it seems to me that we all agree that language is a big issue, and something that we all think should be provided.
And Commissioner Aguirre can probably give us a list of qualified translators.
In fact, I would be one.
It seems like that should be a question too, that as we do our outreach in our regions, that we see if we can maybe start accumulating a list of those translators or agencies that provide translation services so that we can have those accessible to us at a later date.
All right, back to the first meeting in February. I will ask, at what point do we want, how should we proceed is really the issue. I don't know how long it will take for us to identify how many languages we need to provide translation to. Somebody has to take a look at the population of influence in that area and make that determination. I don't think the college is in the best position to interpret that.
Well, we have a motion on the floor to have the next meeting
Right.
in Claremont. I think we've just discussed a philosophy that would be ideal, which may or may not happen in time for that meeting. So, in answer to the question whether it's a showstopper, I don't think that it is. So we
All
can
right.
call the question and just vote on the motion.
Let's do a roll call.
You want to ask for public comment?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Anybody in the public interested in addressing the commission on the topic of moving the first meeting in February to City of Claremont, located in Los Angeles County?
¿Hay alguien en el auditorio que quisiera ofrecer sus comentarios acerca del negocio de esta comisión?
Please come up to the mic, please.
Hi, my name is Lily, and I work in this building. I had a quick question about, because you guys were talking about meeting times. Is your meeting time flexible? Like, will you always meet between 9:30 and 5, or will you be meeting at later times? And this is for your general meeting and for your outreach meetings.
Thank you. Anything else you want to?
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Seeing no one else, I'll close the public input and move it back to the discussion. Meeting time. Anybody interested in considering different meeting time other than the than the standard daytime working hours.
Well, I think we're all interested in being as flexible as we need to be to fulfill our obligations to be open to the public. I don't think it's anything that we can set in stone. I think we have to deal with it as we go along.
I would suggest that for the, as we look at the outreach meetings particularly, that I would hope we would have more of those meetings, also on evenings and weekends, to allow for a different cross-section of people to participate.
My thoughts would parallel with that. I think with outreach meetings, it'd be very appropriate to have those on off hours or off days, weekends, things like that. But for standard business meetings, I think that I like the idea of doing them during traditional business hours. Certainly, there's enough ways to contact the commission, whether it be through email, website, mail, whatever the case may be, for agenda items that are posted 14 days in advance. And it allows us maximum time in that day to do business if we push those just standard commission meetings, not outreach meetings, to later hours and things. I think it might shortchange the meeting or shortchange the work product of that day.
And we are somewhat restricted by where we meet. In other words, this building closed at 5, so we're sort of stuck. And we know we've discussed meeting on the weekends, we can't do that because of the building we're meeting in. So, I mean, I think we could be open to that, but we are somewhat constrained by where we're meeting.
I think specifically, right now, we're talking about the first meeting in February in Claremont. Is there any interest in meeting at a different hours than the hours that we set?
That would include the weekend days as well.
The agenda, as we specified today and likely to continue, is that we meet every day starting at 9:30 and trying to cap the meeting at around 5 p.m. I think that's the way we have agendized all our meetings in the month of January. But if there's interest in modifying those hours, we can certainly entertain that.
I just wanted to clarify for purposes of notice.
Right, the notice has yet gone out for the meeting in February, but that's specifically, that's the consideration we're taking right now, is the meeting in February. But if you want to, we can open it up and discuss hours in general, including the meeting right here.
Well, I think for practical purposes, weekdays tend to limit those people that are working during the day. So going beyond 5 o'clock and having evening meetings would make sense. On the weekend, however, I think more families are available during the regular day hours.
Anyone interested in expanding the weekend hours? Specifically, again, for the February meeting.
Oh, well, I'm not interested. I mean, I think the hours that we have are fine. And I just think we should leave ourselves the flexibility to adjust to wherever we go, because it's not going to be the same for every meeting.
All right, I think we have a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Are we ready to do a roll call?
Could you restate the motion, please?
Cynthia, I think you were the one that made the motion.
I think I said so moved. The motion was to have our meeting in February, beginning on February 9th, in the city of Claremont, and through the courtesy of McKenna Claremont colleges. And it sounds like we'll stick to the 9:30 to 5 schedule. It'll be agendized from the 9th through the 28th.
With the option of modifying
With the option of modifying, which we can do at any point in time.
And who seconded?
I'll second.
It's been seconded,
All right, let's do the roll call, please.
Commissioner Gary?
Yes.
Commissioner Baraba?
Yes.
Commissioner Blanco?
Yes.
Commissioner Dye?
Yes.
Commissioner DeGiulio?
Yes.
Commissioner Felkins Weber? Commissioner Forbes?
Yes.
Commissioner Columbus Malloy?
Yes.
Commissioner Antai?
Aye.
Commissioner Parvenu?
Yes.
Commissioner Rye?
Yes.
Commissioner Ward?
Yes.
Commissioner Yao?
Yes. Toward the middle of next week, I'll have a lot more details for you now that we can task both the colleges and the city to plan out the event. Thank you very much. The City of Claremont is looking forward to having us in Southern California, and I trust that it'll be a very successful meeting site.
Can I just make a motion, a statement about Commissioner Geary just spoke to us in fluent Spanish, and I appreciate that. It's a good, healthy reminder that some of us are Spanish impaired.
All right, what item would you like to entertain next?
Are we going to, I know Commissioner Galamos-Malloy mentioned maybe looking into Oakland for later in February. Are we going to go with that for now? Has that been assumed that we're doing that?
All right, any candidates for the second half of the February meeting sites?
I'm also happy to bump it to March. I mean, I think if we have a location that all the kinks have been worked out, I'm not pushing for the end of February, but I'm saying I could get Oakland in the queue when we would like to change it.
I think this commission is interested in holding meetings at as many sites as possible, so do not interpret that it would make anybody uncomfortable
Great.
to change sites in February. So I for one, would publicly support the goal of having as many meeting at as many different sites across California as possible. So if anybody is interested in initiating any activity to make that happen, I guess let's discuss it now so that we can task you to do so.
Is that it?
Well, I'm happy to do the research for Oakland, and I can report back when we come back next week. I wondered also, do we want any principles around how we think about the rotation? I think it's working out nicely that we're going to Claremont, we come to Oakland. Do we want to aim to have maybe a southern or inland location for the next meeting?
Say, when we were picking the final six, we did have a representative from Fresno come and talk about how important it was that the San Joaquin Valley be represented, so we might want to try and meet them in the southern San Joaquin Valley.
And that was what I was going to ask, was to suggest that we could do a Central Valley, but I did want to ask the commission, as opposed to maybe a large city where you have some contacts, a Central Valley, as you know, is very large. So if you had a preference in the northern part of the valley, central or southern, I'd be happy to look. I know quite a few contacts up and down the valley, but wanted to see if you had any interest in a particular area of the Central Valley. You wanted to do Stockton in the northern part, Fresno, Merced?
I mean, I would be more inclined to go to the southern part, Bakersfield or even Fresno,
Bakersfield.
something, because that's really the part that I think is perhaps has a sense of feeling underrepresented.
Okay. I'll look into Bakersfield and Fresno maybe as options.
Yeah, Visalia is also
Visalia, that's true.
pretty
Visalia.
good-sized city. We received a letter, as I recall, from the city of San Jose.
Yes.
And does anybody recall what they offered or invited us to do?
To host meetings, I
To host a
believe.
meeting.
To host
Yeah.
a meeting or an outreach type thing, or do you? Because,
I don't think they were specific, I think
Okay.
just a meeting. They
okay,
invited
well,
us to a meeting.
I'd be happy to follow up on that, unless somebody has particular connections in San Jose.
All right, Oakland and San Jose are the two potential Central Valley. Again, this is for the second half of the February meeting. I don't think we're going beyond February at this point unless you want to go beyond February, because because second half of February, we have to make some relatively quick decisions. So I
I
would
don't
rather
think it
see us
hurts.
focus on that as compared to planning out and looking at the rest of our meeting schedules.
I don't think it hurts to contact the cities and sort of say, you know, we don't have any specifics, but we'd like to come and perhaps have a commission meeting there. What do you think? I mean, we don't have to be any more specific than that, I don't think, at this point. But I think it behooves us to lay out 6 or 8 places we could have meetings, personally.
And specific.
So we have options.
And by second half, I just want to be specific, we mean the 23rd, the 24th, and 25th of February?
Yes, that's.
Right. Everything has to close to being resolved because we have, again, noticed the meeting 14 days in advance of the 23rd. Somebody like to do math in real time?
I just want to just make the statement, too, that the decision to move it down to Claremont, the idea, I guess, to move the meeting to Claremont was initially, as far as at least I understood it, to be based on certainly getting out of this building and out of Sacramento, but also as there was a budget reason for that as well. That's why we chose that. Since so much of the commission is in Southern California, it made sense to simply, if we're going to move, you know, let's go down there because we save money on travel, hotel rooms, things like that. So that's what kind of drove that. But if we're talking about moving regular commission business meetings around, I would just like to see us, I think, seek several sites, but I think that before decisions are made, we ought to look at what our outreach plan is, because it just doesn't make sense to do that without piggybacking outreach off of it. So I hate to see us just pick locations, not even having an outreach plan yet, you know. It just seems like, again, Claremont, we had a defined goal as to why to do that. And now I kind of hear just a lot of names being thrown in our places, which is great. I think they're wonderful ideas, but before we actually get too far down that road, I think we need to have more discussion about what the mission is of the outreach, and can we, and moving our business meetings off-site, and how can we merge those to make maximum impact with those, with that time.
All right, would someone care to summarize what we have decided and what guideline we're giving to staff in preparing for the second half of the meeting in the month of February?
Well, I'm not sure what staff knows what to do. However, there are several commissioners here in the dais that are volunteering to look at respective regional areas where they're going to contact cities, counties, or whatever, to see if accommodations could be made for the second half of February. And I believe that's it.
And I think the precursor to that is it's fairly urgent to get a brief written write-up around whatever specifications. I have a rough idea, but just so I have something to share around, particularly the technology piece.
All right, I think we have enough guidance at this point in time. So let's wait until next week's meeting before we decide or make additional decision associated with the second half of the February meeting. Yes.
Do you intend for the committees to meet in Claremont?
Yes.
Yes, that was the vote. Specifically for the 9th, 10th, and 11th,
Okay.
including the weekends. The
And
decision for the second half of the February meeting,
has not been made.
if no other alternate viable location is selected, it will continue to be in Claremont. So the notice that we're about to send out by the 25th will notice the meeting, the entire February meeting, to to be in City of Claremont. And then if we have alternate sites selected in time
Then
to
we'll-
change the agenda, then we will.
Okay.
Is that workable?
No, we can do that. That's perfect. That's what I wanted to know. I wanted to know what we're going to say about that second block of time in February. And we can certainly do the notice that way, and then we can put out a revised notice if we're going someplace else.
That's the intent of this commission.
And that the committees will meet concurrently. Do we have breakout sites for the committees?
We will.
And all we need to do then, as long as what the committees are going to talk about are encompassed within the agenda, then if you announce at the beginning of the first meeting when and where the committees are going to meet, then you'll be okay. The other thing is, I'm checking, there's reporting requirements for the FPPC, for the Political Reform Act, when you have a gift to an agency. There are requirements from the Department of Finance when there's a gift to the state. I'm just assuming we're going to do the FPPC reporting, which we have 30 days after the event to do that, and as long as we get a budget for that, we're okay. I'm not sure yet about finance. I called their chief counsel yesterday, actually the day before yesterday, and said, here's what we want to do. Her initial response was, that's not a problem with the public universities, but I'll check about the private universities. Not that we can't do it, but whether we've got to go through some bureaucratic hoops. And I'll get back to you on that as soon as I hear from her.
I think when you're doing that, it might be useful if you just ask, what happens if cities do it or other governmental entities do it, because that's going to come up.
Right. And I think I'm certain that answer will be about the same as it is for UC and CSU, because they're public entities. It's just when you have a private entity. And generally speaking, you need finance's permission, but I'm going to try and explain to them the situation we're in. And there's a form. So I guess I'm just saying this, we may need to get an estimated budget from Claremont for the finance reporting type. And it can be estimated, and it doesn't have to be the kind of detail where you're asking the state for money.
I will obtain that for you
Okay.
from the Claremont colleges.
And hopefully, if I can get a hold of the chief counsel or somebody from finance, either tonight before 5 or, with her before 6 or 7, and then, or maybe in the morning, I'll get back to you and let you know what I find out about those two requirements. But basically, I just wanted to let you know we have to do that.
All right.
And just to be clear, on this point of where we're going to be in the second week of February, we'll have a more definitive answer at our next session.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Now that the decision is made for the meeting in Claremont, in thinking ahead, because of the fact that we're in a brand-new location, this is the first time the commission is outside of Sacramento. The commission is in Southern California. We probably need to do a certain amount of introduction to those in attendance. And I'd like to get volunteers each to do maybe a 5-minute, 7-minute briefing, talking about perhaps the Prop 11, Prop 20, Prop 27, how we get to pick the commissioners, how we pick the 6 finalists, what work we have accomplished in the month of January, and to some extent where we're going to go from here. So I think it would be good for all of us to grab one of those presentations so that above seeing our faces, they actually do hear us talk. So maybe I can work with each of you individually so that you can prepare to start thinking about that presentation in February. Secondly, is that coupled with the outreach discussion that we have had, let's really think about as to whether we want to use that as an outreach opportunity, even though we don't have all our acts together, because it clearly is what the public is expected of us, even though we can tell them all we want to, that this is indeed a business meeting. We're trying to get ourselves prepared for doing the work, but the rest of the world, the media and everybody else would probably have a different expectation, the fact that we're outside of Sacramento. So that's all I want to share with you as to my thought process at this point in time.
Go ahead.
Perhaps, I know that Claremont carries a lot of clout up and down the valley in Los Angeles. I'm sure they have some outreach or some connects with the media. So perhaps we could have a press conference. I mean, it's all about getting information out. You know, there's opportunities like that that we need to take advantage of. Another opportunity is the Common Cause meeting in Los Angeles. I think it's this Saturday. They asked for a representative to come down and talk about and open up the conference with some information regarding the commission. And, you know, those opportunities we should try to utilize as much as possible.
I'll let you all know I did volunteer to do that. It's on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I think Andre is also going to attend, and Peter has indicated that he will attend.
Oh, I'm
So
glad
that's
you
Tuesday.
know, I turned it down because I thought we weren't allowed.
We're not going to attend the conference,
No,
but we're
just
just
now
going
they
to be
had
there
asked
to
me
make
give
the opening statement, yes,
about
yes.
a couple of months ago, and I said, I don't think I can do this, but now I know better. So,
I think it's proper to outreach to them and say a few words about who we are, where we have been, what are we about to tackle, but none of us are staying for their presentation.
I wasn't sure, so I just said no.
But that's a very good point, Commissioner Blanca. I think in our previous discussions, and including today's, we've developed 3 tiers of reaching out to the public. The first one, which is individual, we can attend these group meetings on our own sites in our own regions, only to introduce ourselves, just to say general statements on what redistricting is all about, things of that nature. Published material. That's the first tier. The second tier is what Stan just and us discussed in terms of outreaching to 50 different plus areas, and then the third tier being the regional workshops or whatever we want to call it. That's my understanding of how we're going to be doing this.
Okay.
My only input on that is it's a fantastic roadmap. I just, it seems like the last 3 or 4 items are all agenda items for the communications subcommittee, and especially in conjunction with the communications director.
Mm-hmm.
And if, again, I know I've harped on this 3 or 4 times, and I'm sorry for being repetitive, but I just really feel strongly that until that structure and that communication is taking place, even with the press conference, we could be making a mistake in doing that. It's a marathon, even though it's a very short timeline. This is going to be a bit of a marathon. There's going to be a lot of time for that, but I think that it's really in the body's interest to have the subcommittee in place, the communication director in place, and have that communication for that type of outreach discussed and agreed upon prior to throwing ourselves in that position.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I thought, well, we don't have anything written or guidelines, and when I looked, I mean, I knew everybody there, you know, and it was a group of advocates, of a particular set of advocates with a similar point of view, and I thought, ooh, is this too much like, you know, speaking to one side and not balancing it out with a talk to a similar group of folks, but, you know, with different points of view. So I'm glad we're doing it, but I kind of feel the same way, that rather than keep doing things ad hoc, I would feel more comfortable. I've been unwilling to talk to anybody, press or anything, until I saw something in writing.
The guideline I believe we all have received is we are at liberty to talk about what we have done, and we're not at all encouraged to even give our opinion as to what we're about to do, okay? So I think living within that set of guideline, we should be encouraged to get the word out as to what we have done, so.
We also are not allowed to take input on a one-on-one basis. We are not allowed to take input unless it's in a public forum. So we can talk about anything that's on the record, that's anything that has been done, any basics about redistricting, anything about the law, et
Right.
cetera, but nothing about what we might do or what somebody thinks, unless it's in one of these kind of sessions.
Yeah. We, excuse me, we also, the 8 of us had the benefit of some guidance
Yeah.
in the very beginning from our press person at the Auditors Bureau, so, but you're right, there's, still, we need to be cautious. I would just say if anybody has any particular points or suggestions, anything that, you would like me to talk about on Tuesday, I'd be happy to receive any comments.
I would just be curious, and it's up to you, I guess it's your prerogative as to what you and Andre might be thinking of talking about. But I guess there's an aspect of it, I feel like kind of what you do also represents us, too. So not that I feel like we should micromanage your talk, but I do feel like there are implications for the rest of us, and not that I don't have confidence in you at all. Quite on the contrary, much more you than me, I suppose. But I just would be curious if you wanted to share with us some of that, or if you felt like you had any ideas, or I don't know what the other commission wants to get any feedback from you.
Well, my intention is just to introduce the commission. I mean, the purpose of this conference is to encourage people to participate in our process, the commission's process. So while, yes, it is represented by people with, I don't know, I wouldn't even say they're all of a particular point of view. They're just all people who are interested in maximizing community participation in the redistricting process. So my only intention is to introduce the commission, what in general is going to be happening, our intention to do outreach, how happy we are that somebody is, collaborating in that process, or maybe doing a lot of the legwork for us. And to kind of, I also want to put a little bit of a personal face on the commission by describing, who we all are and what we represent and what our commitment is. So it's all very general. And they understand that. They've been very sensitive to the fact that I cannot answer questions or discuss redistricting and so on. They just kind of want to kick off that whole process of getting people engaged. They were instrumental, from what I understand, in getting, the 30,000 people to apply for the commission. So, and, obviously, they want to make this a success as much as we do.
I'd say ditto to that, Commissioner Raya. And in addition, I would introduce the website to perhaps have them submit public comments on our website so that we can collectively digest this information. Also, perhaps discuss the fact that we have secured an executive director on board, and I think we went over a list the last time we met about some of the accomplishments we've made up to this point. Just general information. No details about redistricting per se or our approach.
When we were still with the BSA, Margarita gave us some very broad strokes guidelines on how we might introduce ourselves, and I think it was more applicable to thinking how you present yourself as a commissioner, tell your story, what are some, broad strokes that sort of tell about Proposition 11. I'd be happy to forward those to the full commission in case they're useful.
It sounds like that presentation is extremely useful to the 6 commissioners that have since joined the initial group of 8. Maybe we should try to schedule that as soon as possible, because I know Ann is trying to signal me. But whether it happens this week or not, it is depending on schedule, but it
You're
seems like.
asking for Margarita to come and do the same type of
Right,
training with us?
right. We got a lot out of it, and I think a live presentation may be extremely worthwhile so that we're on the same page.
Peter, and then we actually had, I think Stan and Cynthia and I did an interview following that, and then Cynthia wrote up the comments that were made, and that might be helpful to distribute as well.
You know, since we have half an hour left, and it seems like we're heading in the direction of wanting to discuss the communication outreach type of activity, perhaps we should dive into that a little deeper. If there is feeling on this commission saying that we want to formalize all the news release, perhaps this is the time to talk about it. If we want to limit the individual contact with the media, this is the time to talk about it. So let's just kind of open it up to share a little bit of thought as to how we want to behave as a group.
Well, let me go back to the comment made by Commissioner Ward. If we're going to make these next succeeding meetings as efficient by having business matters discussed as well as outreach functions done, then just out of curiosity, what do we mean by outreaching, and what exactly are we going to be doing as part of the business meeting? Are we going to be reaching out to communities of interest, in which case we need the data that Commissioner Blanca mentioned? Just how much are we going to define redistricting at that point?
Well, I think that's a great question, Commissioner. That's kind of earlier when we were talking, that's one of the things I was trying to, in my own mind, parcel out is what is the actual vision and purpose of our Claremont business meeting, and then what's the purpose and vision of a outreach meeting. And like I said, we talked about 3 goals that it sounded like we all kind of agreed with that we seek to accomplish with outreach. Again, awareness, education, and receiving testimony, and concerns of those communities we're visiting. With the business meetings, again, it's to conduct, the way I understand it, the business of the commission to further the process, make decisions, and on the data that we've received. Again, in discussing moving to Claremont, like I've already said, there was a very specific purpose for that. The purpose was to, from a fiscal perspective, at least in my mind, the way I understood it, was to help alleviate some of the strains on the budget, as well as just at the time there was concerns about facilities, and if we would be able to be here in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or not. And so it seemed like an appropriate thing to consider. And again, I'm asking if now that we're taking beyond this one single Claremont meeting and talking about moving business meetings to other locations, if we can find a way or discuss a policy for which we can piggyback outreach meetings with a specific set of goals, whether it be those 3 we've kind of listed here or broader, and like I said, again, maximize the impact of that time and effort. Seems to me that again, once we get the communications director and that communications subcommittee going, we'll be able to have things like a standardized address for welcome address, a history of the commission of Prop 11, all that stuff will be standardized by then. It won't be up to the individual commissioner to write up 5 minutes blurbs or that kind of thing. We'll have a standardized, unified mission that the whole board has agreed, the whole body's agreed that this is the message and that we want to put out. And so that's the only, as eager as I am to run and run hard, I do think that if we can focus on getting the subcommittees, communications director, and then the resulting immediate work product completed, we can run a lot faster and make a much bigger impact and awareness.
Commissioner Ward, how would you distinguish between awareness and education?
Well, I think awareness of, the way I understood it earlier, as we were discussing and took notes, I understood two different ideas being communicated by the body here, and education about how districts affect, the impact of drawing district lines on the immediate community. So why is this important to Joe citizen, if you will? And then awareness being separate from the fact that this commission is occurring, that you have the ability to make feedback on the process, awareness to our mission. So I see awareness as to the process and the ability to participate in it, and education as far as how districting matters to them being two separate issues. Maybe there's more. Anybody?
No, I would just comment that I think that that's right, but I think the way I've been looking at it, the bulk of the meeting is really to receive information.
Outreach meeting, yes? Okay.
Yeah, to help us
I agree.
be able to make the decisions we have to make about
Absolutely.
communities of interest and,
Agreed.
So I think I would keep that, the informational background and why this happens every 10 years after a census, to a sort of a very standard sort of overview and answering some questions, and then devote the majority of the time to receiving.
I do think, Commissioner, to kind of merge both what Commissioner Ward and Commissioner Blanco are saying, though, too, I think in order to get the most effective feedback, we do have to provide a condensed but very informative educational background, because people could be coming to this with a lot of different understanding of what they could tell us. They just may not be happy about their representation. They may.
Right.
So the more we can guide them as to what we need, the better and more effective we will be at getting information and having them be heard.
But once we get into get the subcommittee up and running, what we can do is put together, again, those ideas, the agenda, the proposed, agenda for how we would run that meeting. We'd have a list of protocols and things like that, and we can discuss all that as a body, and hammer and amend those items. That way we'll have, like the chairman was mentioning, a standardized process for all of our outreach.
I think Commissioner Yao is suggesting, though, that we may want to talk about an education or awareness, depending on how you see it, component for our business meeting, which I think is a great idea, because we are in a new location. And I think it's a great idea to start the meeting with an introduction and overview of the process. I do think, it should be fairly condensed. I don't think it should go on and on, but.
I think our objective also would be changing as time goes on. Certainly during the first half of our activity, the outreach is to collecting data. But as soon as we start drawing up maps, we also have to sell our product so that when it gets approved, people understand as to why the product is good. And if you try to sell it at that point in time without proper quote-unquote education, then it may be a very difficult task to accomplish. So certainly we have spent a block of time in terms of saying the outreach is pulling input so that we can draw the proper map. But along the way, if you don't convince people that we are going to be generating a good product, and by the time the product shows up, it just may be a little too late to convince them that it is good. In terms of communication, should we limit the output to a set of formal press releases? Should we continue to do what some of us have been doing, just answer a lot of questions as the press or media raise them before us individually? What is this commission's best thinking on that?
know an earlier meeting, we were discussing chief counsel, and one of the things we discussed briefly was the idea of any staff, if they were going to attend lectures or a speaking engagement, making the commission aware of that prior to, in case the commission saw a conflict between that effort and the commission or their business with us. It seems to me like that might be an appropriate way for us to do it as commissioners as well. If someone gets an invitation or an offer to participate in a meeting or speak at one or conduct any kind of large-scale interview, that something like that be brought to the board and everyone can just put their 2 cents in or bless it, or if there's maybe a reasonable objection not to do that. But it seems like that for a media strategy, that makes sense rather than a shotgun approach. Because any organization I've ever been a part of that has a number of individuals going at will, and problems arise, and being that problems in our case can lead to legal issues later. It seems to me that it would just be smart to at least have the minimal control on media contact or public address statements, things like that, to have the board at least be aware of it prior to it occurring.
Go ahead.
Tomorrow, I think we're going to hear from our executive director about his staffing plans, and I can only imagine one of them is going to be the director of communications. And I spent a lot of time in different parts of the state, but we really need somebody who's used to doing a statewide communications plan. And we should learn from that person what our strategy should be, rather than taking it piece at a time, I would suggest.
I agree. I was just going to say that the nature of media requests is that they're very time sensitive. And so it's unlikely we could, wait for 2 weeks until the next commission meeting and get approval. I think what we want to do, and what eventually will be the responsibility of the staff person, what we tried to do for the first day was to, provide a set of standard talking points so that we're at least consistent in representing our work. And then after that, I think, we were all picked because we represent different communities, and I think that we should feel free to do media interviews to the degree that each of us are individually comfortable doing that, understanding the legal, ramifications and limitations on what we are not allowed to talk about.
Yeah, excuse me, just second that. We had a whole flurry of invitations when we first got selected, and I assume that maybe the 6 also had some calls when you were selected. I think we know what the parameters are. We know what the restrictions are. I think we're all capable of making a decision. You just have to think about who's asking you, why they're asking you, and do you want to do it? You're not under an obligation to do any interview if you're not comfortable doing it or you're concerned about where it might go. But I think we have to have a little bit of trust in each other, that we understand what some of those very real pitfalls might be. And you just, I think it helps. I can tell you this. I go to bed kind of running a little script through my mind, and I wake up doing the same thing, and I try to make little notes to myself so that I feel well enough prepared. And Peter and I did this too, I think, when we did the NBC interview, just trying to kind of anticipate and setting the ground rules so that whoever is interviewing you knows right from the start, I cannot talk about this. Okay, there are going to be different questions. Maybe people are going to start to get calls about who we select for the, empty spot. I don't know. But I think we just, we know what the rules are, and if we can get a little more training, maybe that'll make everybody comfortable with it. But I think in the end, we are a citizen commission, and people want to hear from citizens. Yes, we will have a press person, we will have formality, but we're supposed to be, like everybody else. We're just the people doing the people's work, and so I think it's important that our voices are heard.
I would just counter that with the idea that, again, it's not a trust issue. Everybody here is amazingly capable and intelligent and eloquent. And I also don't think it's an issue of censoring or putting a leash on anything at all. But again, having a communications director in place is going to help a lot with this. But simply, although we are individual citizens and we represent, we're also have part of a legally obligated body. And it just seems to make sense that not so much quick press questions and things like that. Certainly, that's where those situations are going to come up if a reporter comes up and asks you a question on a day's event or something. Certainly, you would have the liberty to. But if formal requests for lecturing or speaking or being present at some kind of a function, things like that, it just seems like since it impacts the entire body, the whole group ought to at least just be made aware of it. And once we have a communication director, we can delegate that responsibility to him and say, make him aware of it. Maybe he can help you blowing up, whatever the case may be. But it just seems to me that before we accept something beyond a simple press inquiry, we ought to at least have somebody that we make aware of that and bless it, whether it be the commission body as a whole or whether it be the communications director, whatever the case may be.
I think what became very clear to me in watching the tapes and the training sessions is that there is one thing individually and as a commission we have to totally stay away from is anything that implies we're forming maps. I think we have to make clear, whatever our announcements are at any venue, that we, as soon as the discussion moves towards or implies that it's moving towards forming maps, we have to step back.
Could I just request, I know we all have different levels of comfort when it comes to dealing with the media, and I totally recognize that, and I think people will speak to their strengths when they're addressed, but would it be too much of a request to just, for those that do speak to the media anyway, to, again, relay it to the rest of us? I wasn't aware of, maybe the interview that Commissioner Ryan and Chairman Yao have done, or other requests. I know a few things have been scattered around just for our information, so we could kind of look at it. But it'd be just for our own information to see what we're saying. It'd be nice to know that if someone asked you, well, what did you think of Commissioner Raya's interview? Well, I didn't know she did it. So, I just for the sake of us looking like we're a united front, that we could all let each other know when something like that happens.
Great idea.
I also wonder from the interview that was done at the time that we chose the final 6, I think that, we had 3 representatives from the commission go speak to the press, and there were some fairly standard questions that were asked, and maybe those of you who were in that interview could share some talking points from that as well.
I sent them around to everyone.
Okay.
Okay. I will send it around
Okay,
to the finalists.
All right, so the point about letting everybody else know what's about to happen, so it's just simply letting staff know, and staff will turn around and disseminate the information. Another practice I'd like to suggest before this commission is try to solicit another commissioner from a different party, so that when you speak before the group, you're no longer just representing yourself, but at least representing, or at least have a second person representing the other I don't want to call it individuals or parties or anything else, to show that we are working as a team. And now sometimes it's not at all practical to do it, but whenever it's practical, I would like us to adapt that as a mode of operation. Is if you have time, bring a second person along, so that it's not just a voice, but it's represent the voice of the group. At least it'll come across that way when multiple people appear at a function.
The other thing is, it might be good to share different kinds of requests and maybe decide how we want to respond. I know I've had 2 LA Times requests that I've refused to respond to, where they were asking me for my letter of letter that I sent for my last day of employment at my last job, and my offer letter and date for my current job. And I think it was this whole issue of, me moving from Northern California to Southern California, and when had it happened and why. And I didn't feel it was an appropriate request. If somebody had just wanted me to answer a question about, why did you change jobs, I think that would be, but, wanting me to send documentation, like proof, like they were tracking something down, just for some reason it felt like a privacy issue to me. So first of all, I don't know if other people have had requests like that, but on something like that, I think we should let folks know when we get a request, and maybe somebody's providing it, they don't have the privacy concern, and I do. And I don't know we can't dictate what people do, but, and we can insist on consistency, because different one of us have different standards of what we consider intrusive and not intrusive. But there are things like that are not just going to be a question. There might be all kinds of things that come up, media-related requests, that it might be good at least for us to always have a sense of what's going on in relationship to us in the media, so that we're not, I don't know, it's not a question of having a planned response. It's just, I think we want to operate as a body as much as possible.
I think you did a great job of saying what I was trying to, and obviously couldn't clearly. Again, it's not for a trust or ability or any of that kind of issues. It's just simply having a point, since we don't have a point person now, you know what I mean? And we're having to act in this capacity on these things, just bringing it up so that the whole commission's aware, of what's going on and how. And for an example, we've already discussed today the common cause thing. There might have been some members on the commission who didn't know that it would have been appropriate to sit and attend that meeting. They might not have known, but in bringing it up, we knew, it might not be a good idea.
Well,
It's still an individual decision.
I apologize for that, because I thought that everyone got a copy of that letter at the meeting.
Yeah, I didn't realize someone had made it.
And
I looked at it and said, that'll definitely be something nobody does. And Commissioner Blanco looked at it and said, well, I would like to, but I won't. And you said, that's great. So it's just an individual preference, but I didn't, it just shows you the way we approach public speaking. But it would be great to know that it was accepted.
I'm not attending the meeting. I'm only speaking and leaving.
Absolutely. And I think that's great. And right now, it's not such a big deal, but as the process continues, it's often not what you say, it's what you don't say that, will be the story. And so I just think, like I said, not putting restrictions, not hand tying, not anything, just simply trying to consolidate that type of information and putting it through some kind of screening process from the standpoint of just having a sounding wall, whether it be the commission or the communication director, but somebody who can just say, that seems like a great idea.
All right, we'll cap that particular discussion at this point, but what I want to take the last few minutes to do is to give you a heads up as to what we want to discuss tomorrow. Clearly, we have to discuss the outreach. Let's see, I think we went beyond framework, so what's the next level of details that we want to get to in the outreach activities? Anybody want to try to characterize that?
A format for the actual hearings themselves,
Okay.
a protocol for that.
Another topic would be to discuss the specific directions that we want to give to our executive director as a commission. So I suspect that'll take a block of time. That would include staffing and all the details associated with it. And I'm sure I'm sure there'll be a long list of items. Yes, Mr. Ward.
I was just going to ask, did we find out if we were going to be able to have any interviews for tomorrow?
I believe, comments, yes.
No, we haven't had time to even contact anyone, and so it's going to be necessary for us to send out notice to all these individuals. I don't have the list at this point of the that I know of the communications officers, and certainly there was just no time during the day to call any of the other candidates. So that has to be done this evening and tomorrow, and so that's where we're at with that. And I do have a couple of housekeeping issues before we're finished.
All right, I'll make sure you have time to raise those issues. Any other items that we look forward to completing tomorrow above and beyond those two lengthy items that I brought up? I know in previous, or in last week's agenda, Secretary of State's support efforts, update and decision. I don't know whether that's still a necessary item on the agenda or not, because we were going to discuss a couple of the contracts that we want to let out. If that happened to be still necessary topics, then we'll address those. If not, we'll just continue getting into defining the organization and defining the philosophy. And I'm still hopeful that by the end of January, we can put this organization issue behind us and start the work of addressing the mapping issue. So, yes, go ahead, Dan.
Ann, would you just... we have the list of the 7 candidates for Commissioner Keogh's replacement. It's being handed out to you now. As soon as you get it, if I could have the approval, then we will go ahead and post that up so that it goes onto the website and it can be accessed. The remaining 7 are Victoria Agoyo Shupak from Los Angeles, Angelo Anchetta from San Francisco, Tangerine Brigham from Alameda, Maria Harris from Los Angeles, Lillian Judd from San Luis Obispo, Anne Marie Manchemer from Santa Clara, and Bright Star Olson from Alameda. So with your consent, I will go ahead and post that up, or have it posted up.
Now, for the audience that are listening in on to our conversation, and for those that are joining us in midstream, this is the complete list of the Democratic candidates from the original pool of 36 candidates. Is that correct?
That is correct. It is the remaining Democratic candidates from the pool that was sent back from the legislature to the state auditor.
All right, so we have made a recent query to all these candidates, and they are still interested in the commission position.
Yes.
Okay. Any thoughts on posting the names? I think by definition we posted it already by by reading the list.
Dan, just out of curiosity, anyone turn it down?
No, those
No,
are
yeah.
those are the remaining individuals. And this will also, when we say posting, this will be their full materials.
Okay.
The other, I'm sorry. Can I move on to the next issue? Oh,
Let's see, a question. The selection process that we went through in December are those relevant informations for this exercise? In other words, are they still available on the website? Are they, if people are interested in it, can they still access that information?
The transcripts and the video are still on the website.
And
Thank you.
the affiliated materials, right? Because there were things that were projected up with maps and all that stuff.
Yes, Ann's telling me that would be the commissioner tab, and it is still available as well.
And there's supplemental applications and all that are still up? Yeah. Well, they're posting it. Okay.
Because they were taken down
Yeah.
as soon as they were known, so they'll be back up. The second issue, IT needs about 30 minutes of your time to walk you through a few more items. Would you like to do it tomorrow at before 9:30, or would you like to do it at lunch? It's your choice.
Let's see, I gave them a time slot right after lunch, and we were not able to keep that appointment, so we need to probably set time aside to do it as compared to do it when we have a break, so I would suggest that we schedule that in right now.
So can I say that we will meet at 8:50?
Yes.
Is that okay? Yes. Okay. Then I will
Again,
tell
the
them-
formal meeting will start at 9:30 as agendized, but we're going to be here at 8:50 to take care of the computer issues.
Exactly.
To make sure that we're not changing the meeting agenda for tomorrow.
Yes, sir.
Is this
Okay.
John Hannafy or someone else?
Pardon me?
Is this John Hannafy or someone else?
It'll be someone else. That's all I have.
All right, anything else anybody want to say or discuss before we recess until tomorrow morning at 9:30?
I think just a reminder that everyone should get their committee choices, top 3 ranked to Dan, so that we can sort that out.
Email Dan between now and 9:30 tomorrow morning. Is that the suggestion? Thank you. All right, see you tomorrow at 9:30.